All right, good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Monday, August 5th. So, big sell off day today, big downward action. And I think in the after hours, I don't think that bounce that we saw right at the end of the day, possibly a little bit of covering for the end of the day. Looks like that's been kind of negated. So we'll kind of we'll see what we get tomorrow. I know they're running, it seems like a CNBC Markets and Turmoil special, which I find interesting that they're doing that already. But, maybe that kind of just tells you where the overall, how quickly the sentiment has moved. The VIX was in the 12 handle last week, closed at 24. So that's how quickly sometimes volatility can arise. It's you don't get much of a second chance. Sometimes when the VIX starts to pick up like this, it moves very, very quickly. This is just the chart that I was illustrating. Again, I always like to look at some of the concepts that we go over in the weekend video. By the way, if anybody wants to receive that who didn't, this video goes out public, but I do about an hour video depending on what's going on the weekend. If it's quiet and there's not that much setups, which I think we did a more quieter video about not this weekend but last weekend. This one I spent about an hour just talking about a lot of concepts like sediment and so forth. And pretty much half of what I went through, we were talking about sediment was turning. But a lot of them weren't at extreme sentiment bearish readings, right? Which sometimes can cause, when sentiment moves from super bullish, it usually takes some time before it gets all the way to the end of the spectrum. So I think we're obviously closer to that than where we were on Friday. But here's what I was thinking was that downside VPOC 2889. Well, we zipped right through this. Clearly there was volume. I talked about how there was some sell signals that appeared, such as the moving average crossover, price dipping below the 20-day moving average, which it really hasn't done that since back here. But if you look at where we are now, I mean, just a monster day to the downside, down 3.6%. And things got pretty oversold in the short term. So I did add some risk a little bit today. I'll talk about that a little bit. But you could see from the RSI, I mean, this is where I kind of just gave it a shot here at the end of the day. We got to a 14 RSI. These are very good for looking at, again, super short term. I jumped in some SPY calls. I jumped out of them in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, right into here. And I didn't time the bottom perfectly. I think I got in here, so I had to wait until price was back above here. But anyway, that was just one trade. There's a couple other trades. Unfortunately, with the way that the market moves, you get stopped out, and you don't really have much chance on the open to sell because the way that the market was moving. I always like to wait till the end of the day in any event, but I had to take a couple stops in some positions. Do I wish that I would have, sold out of those on Friday? Sure. But those were mainly stock positions. So it is what it is. But yeah, you could see us selling off here a little bit. So we're almost back to the lows. So I don't know. It seems like we may have a little bit more to go here to the downside. So the option activity for the most part, I like to look at the put call ratio. That's definitely heightened. So there is fear out there. And I think that's better to look at than the VIX, which the VIX I'll bring up in just a second. But yeah, I mean, this got pretty heavily. People were buying puts today, and more so. So again, that usually is a contrarian indicator that you can use once everybody is all to one side of the boat. Sometimes we do get a move back. Is that, have we hit that yet? I don't know. I don't know. I think the fear and greed index is something to look at, but that's, to me, that's not always the best indicator. The VIX did close on the highs. So we'll have to see what the overnight session does as well. We even went down further. U.S. markets went down further than what we saw in Asia and in Europe today. So we really took the brunt of it today. So VIX, yeah, closed on 24. That's not a sell signal. I would say we were talking about in the weekend video. There was a couple a couple candles here towards the end of the week that said, okay, well, maybe that might be the end of it for now. But once China retaliated, and then another Trump tweet, and it is what it is. We're just in a very headline-driven uh, driven tape right now. So what do we see? Well, I mentioned that the put activity was really heavy. Definitely on the call side, did we see any buying the dip type trades? One thing that we saw towards the end of last week too is Salesforce. We continue to see some buying going on here. I don't know if some of it is just flipping to September. I think maybe possibly some of that is, but there was another call spread that went up too. And keep in mind, a lot of this stuff looks earnings related. So I don't know if they're just positioning, out of stock and into calls and putting on having less exposure. Sometimes they like to do that. You just don't know. There was a couple shots in Facebook today. We saw some Facebook calls go up a couple times. We also saw, but for the most part, a lot of it was smaller stuff. Here's one here, October 195, October 210 calls. This order caught my eye. I did take this trade. I tend to look for high quality names. If I can find it here, there was some Visa October calls that went up. 175 that caught my eye. Again, this was over open interest, so these are things that I like to look for. And it's a little bit of catching knives, and that's why I think options are a little bit better here because you just don't have a line of sand, line in the sand. Where's my 200-day moving average here on the charts? Let's just bring that up here. I don't know why that is off here. But this is a little bit, a lot of things are starting to look broken a bit, and sometimes they take a little bit of while. It takes a little while to mend. So, that's my game plan. Like I said, some things that I think I've been waiting to get into for a while, and I think are quality names. That's kind of what I tend to focus on when we have days like this where everything is going down. I look for quality names. Also a little bit of minimum volatility names. So I put out a whole watch list of names, and then what we do is we kind of look for levels, right? So for example, like Costco is a name. I try to look for these downside VPOCs or when they're taken out. Costco had a 1 hour one taken, or a couple of them taken out here. So that to me makes sense, to give it a try after several of them have been taken out to the downside. Again, virgin point of controls, high areas of volume, right, that have not been revisited. There's also one for Abbott, Abbott Labs, which I also feel is a best in breed name. There was a virgin point of control taken out here. Let's just talk about because again, a lot of things when the market when volatility moves like it does the last couple days, everything starts to move as one. TLT pretty overbought here on the 1 hour bar. This is now pretty again RSI for this one overbought 77 RSI and the last VPOC taken out. So that's it. This was something that we talked about last week. However, I didn't think it would hit this quickly, but that's been taken out and fulfilled. Bonds just continue to rally all the way through the day. If you look at the long bond, which also took out the last VPOC in here, I mean, this is a monster day for bonds. But look at this is still moving up here in after hours. So 161.07 is where this is. There's still a bid in bonds. So yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Gold did give back some of the gains, but that looks like it's rallying too. So these are the things that are still going up. So the old saying is these markets can act crazier. They can act more irrational than you can stay solvent. So just be careful of that. These things are really, bonds especially are getting really overbought, but they can continue to get more overbought in the short term. Eventually, I think they come in, but how much pain can you endure if you're adding to risk and so forth? So you really have to be careful with that. I mean, I tried a couple trades today, and thinking that we had a shot to kind of come back a little bit in this afternoon. And I just stopped myself out of them. Microsoft was one of those where I was able to hit one target at, and then it just kept on slipping. And you stop yourself out, and then you kind of just you take another view, at another time. There's no problem for taking, as long as you're monitoring names very carefully. So after you get stopped out in a trade, you could always go back in. But this was something where I was trying to leg into a position, and there's just too much volatility. So that's fine. I mean, this is not a sprint; it's a marathon. The only names that really did not behave this way is your newer IPO names, right? I saw a lot of people talking about these names on Twitter. They're like, "Wow, look at the relative strength in Beyond Meat." Well, that's because it's not in. Let's think about this logically, right? This is not a major conclusion here, but Beyond Meat is not in any indices yet. Either is Slack, which was up. This thing went up what 1.7%. They're not in any indices, so you could see the volume at the end of the day in SPY. Look at this. Look at this amount. I mean, SPY traded I think 3 times normal volumes today. EEM traded 2.5. So what happens basically for a name like Microsoft, it's not going to be trading on its fundamentals today. I mean, you could argue whether or not it ever trades on its fundamentals, but today it's not going to be trading on its fundamentals. It's one of the biggest weights in the SPYs and the Qs. So if somebody's selling 174 million shares of SPY, Microsoft is going to have a really tough time moving up on the day. Of course, there could be single stock buyers in the name, but when something gets, when when the indices have this much volume in them, 3 times normal volumes, it's going to get scooped up in the volume with that. GDX traded what 1.5 times volumes. The Qs traded 3 times normal volumes. So again, this is a multiplier. It does a little calculation based on what the historic volume is, 30-day volume. HYG, this is a little bit of a cause for concern. Keep in mind the mechanics behind HYG. Do I have this up here? That basically guys who are hedging big institution orders, they have to hedge themselves, right? So if they're facilitating those orders, they have to be able to hedge themselves. What do? They sell a little bit of SPY to be able to hedge themselves. You could see credit spreads. I did talk a little bit about this in the weekend video. That now ticked up to basically towards the end of May levels. So we'll see if it takes out that high. Still not nearly as high as December, but I don't think that you could really make a conclusion based on how that candle closed on the day. All right, guys, so we'll leave it there. A little bit of a shorter video because I think we just, again, you need to take this day by day. That was one of the major things that I stressed in the weekend video is it's good to formulate a watch list at this point and paying close attention to some names and maybe nibbling on some names if you've got a longer time frame. But you kind of just have to let this play out. Sometimes it's a couple days, sometimes it's a little bit longer than that. So I think we're not out of the woods yet in terms of volatility. So we'll see how we shape up into tomorrow. And that's it. Of course, this video for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. Have a great night, everybody, and see you tomorrow.